Welcome to Burning River Radio on a wonderful Sunday evening after the Indians beat the Twins. I am Joe Koblitz, and I'm here today with Justin Latta.
Hey.
He's a whole lot of love. And so today was a fun day. The Indians won after losing 2 in a row to the Twins, thanks to essentially a lack of offense. They scored a few runs against Toronto last week. At the end of the series, they had a couple good scoring games. They lost 2 out of 3 against Toronto still. And then they came back against Minnesota and couldn't score at all until they got 8 runs on Sunday, which was a pretty good game. You got any thing off the top here, Justin?
I mean, then shake the lineup. I talking about the lineup, I guess, but I mean, it worked for one day. I don't know if it'll work the whole time, but it was good. I mean, when you score, I think they scored their last run in the 4th inning against Toronto on Wednesday, and then they didn't score again until whenever Berrios uncorked that wild pitch on Saturday.
Santana hit a triple, and it should have been a home run, except for they had some superhero playing center field for the Twins, and he kind of hit it with his glove.
Brought it back, yeah.
And kept it in the stadium for a triple. And so Santana scored on the wild pitch after that.
So I think they went 24 innings without scoring a run, if I'm right, when they didn't score since the 4th inning against Toronto. So when you go that long without scoring a run, then yeah.
Okay, and I was looking for.
I'm glad they didn't just sit on it.
I was looking for somebody, but I must have picked the wrong person to look up. One of the Twins beat writer type people had tweeted something today about how Hector Santiago had a career ERA of whatever it is, 4 point something, and his season ERA was 2 point something, and essentially Hector Santiago is not a great pitcher, but he was pitching like a Cy Young up to today. And his FIP for the season was 3.80, I believe, and now his ERA for the season is 3.79. So that could be a coincidence or it could be reality. I think Hector Santiago was due for some extreme regression. He wasn't striking guys out. He's still not striking guys out. He didn't strike out maybe one Indian today. He's not a great pitcher. Irvin Santana is not a great pitcher. They don't have a great rotation in Minnesota. They were all pitching over their heads, and for the Indians to score 8 runs today is not a surprise at all.
For them to score 0 runs was probably the bigger surprise, or 1.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know who pitched up for them on Friday, because I can't figure out why they couldn't do it Friday night.
Yeah, no, it's I think the Twins are still in first, of course, because they beat the Indians 2 out of 3. So I mean that's going to happen, but they're definitely not going to stay there. They just don't have the talent 1 through 9. They don't have the talent in the starting rotation to stay in first place all season. The Indians do have that talent. There's really no other team in the Central that does. So the fact that they're in second doesn't bother me at all.
I would also say the Twins don't have the minor league system either to go out and acquire a lot of any kind of impact talent they would need. Like if they get to August and they're still a couple games out or whatever, I don't think they have the kind of prospects it takes to go out and land someone that's going to help them. I don't think they would if they could, because.
Well, no, this isn't their year. I mean, maybe like the White Sox last year, where the White Sox were kind of borderline contending. I think they may have tried that, and then they decided to rebuild during the offseason. So they
traded for James Shields, and that worked out great. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the White Sox were at that point last year. The Tigers maybe at that point, although they shouldn't be. The Royals have to be at the selling point. Obviously, they're playing like shit, so they wouldn't be thinking about buying anyway. But I don't think the Twins are fooled by how well they're playing.
Probably not. I'm sure Derek Falvey and Thad Levine aren't either, considering they just got there and there's a whole lot of changes they want to make, and they have the first overall pick in the draft. So I mean, they're just not. This is not their year.
Yeah, they've got some
It won't
solid play. They've got some solid players, but it's nowhere near a playoff contending team essentially. And I think you're still looking. Somebody just posted on Twitter how many wins the Indians going to get, and I think I said 96 preseason. I'm still going to say 96. I think there's no way they don't run away with this thing. So you were talking minor league for a moment there, the Twins minor league system. The Indians brought up Daniel Robertson today. They also brought up Eric Gonzalez and finally cut Michael Martinez. Brandon Guyer, unfortunately, went on the DL with a sprained left wrist. Before I talk shit on Michael Martinez.
The whole podcast is not going to be about talking shit on Michael Martinez.
It isn't?
It shouldn't be.
Damn it.
Is he okay, really worth talking about for 45 minutes? Let's be honest.
No, I'll say my only points on Michael Martinez are I want to know what the Indians value. And I wish there was some mathematical formula I could put together to see like the Indians value this over this and this over this. Like, you know, like to see exactly what they think is important. Because to me and everyone else I've ever read, Michael Martinez is one of the worst players in baseball history. Like, not Indians history, baseball. Like, in the history of baseball, 150 years, however many years do you want to go back to the first Reds team ever? He's one of the worst players ever. So how he was ever on this team for 5 minutes?
Let's kind of compare
or the 2016.
That, I mean, you remember the '95 Indians carrying Alvaro Espinosa?
But he was better than Michael Martinez.
Was he though?
I could look it up.
1995, really Alvaro Espinosa had an OPS plus of 51. 51 in 150 plate appearances. Yeah. Let me go on. Let's evaluate Alvaro Espinosa's time with the Indians.
This is going to be really entertaining to everybody. But I will say no. Okay, one of your points, and I saw you talking on Twitter about it earlier. One of your points was that Martinez hadn't played at all this year. Essentially, like in the last 2 weeks, he's played in 2 weeks,
and he came in on a necessity when.
And he came in defensively like twice. Yeah, and 2 guys were hurt, and he still only started 2 games. If Eric Gonzalez was on that team during that period, I feel like he would have gotten into more than a couple games. Okay, I have Espinosa's numbers up now. He had a 1.7 WAR in 1991. Okay,
time with the Indians.
He had a 0.8 WAR in his first year with the Indians, 1993. You're not gonna. Indy had one in 1996. Martinez never had anything nearing a 1-win season with any team ever. So Espinosa had 4 seasons that were around or over 1 win. He was
Enrique Wilson.
Enrique Wilson was decent, but he never. And the other thing is, like most of these guys, they'd come up, they'd play a year. Espinosa played 4 years for the Indians, but it was mostly in the shitty years. 93, 94 were his first 2 seasons. He didn't play very much at all in 95 and 96, and he was gone mid-season 96.
And they had Jeff Branson for a year, too.
Yeah, but that was a really short time. I think a lot of these guys, you bring them up, you play them for a few minutes, and they're gone if they're not good. Like Eric Gonzalez, if he had a hit today and Underwood went crazy and was acting like he's going to be up with the team forever because he got a single today, which I thought was pretty funny. But let's say let's say Egon can't hit at all and he starts making errors. He won't be around at the end of the season. Like, he's not going to last if he doesn't deserve a spot on the team.
Correct.
So why did Martinez stay around when he didn't deserve that spot on the team? Like, they can go through these guys. They could bring up Giovanni Ursula. He'd be great at third base defensively. They can move Jose Ramirez around if they need to. He could do the exact same thing that Martinez did, playing once a week, starting once a week and pinch running. Ursula could do that.
I like Kevin
So
Gonzalez for the fact that he can probably. I mean, I would assume he can hit better than Martinez, but at some point, Lindor and Ramirez need days off. And Tito said that those two guys haven't had days off, and if Kipnis needs a day off, he can play. And if I guess he can go in the outfield too, but I mean he can spell anybody on the infield at any time.
Well, before we get too deep on Gonzalez, I feel like Gonzalez is going to be sent down in like 3 days. So I don't
for who
know that you want to go
Jackson
for Austin Jackson.
What about Yandy Diaz then?
I think Yandy Diaz is here to stay. I think if they were going to send Yandy down, I think they would have already, because you can send Yandy down and you don't lose anything. You send Michael Martinez down and you expose him to waivers.
That's the most confusing thing to me, though, is that when they sent Yandy back when Kipnis came back, it was, well, we want him to play every day. It doesn't help him sitting on the bench up here. Then he makes 2 bad plays in left field in Toronto. All of a sudden he's not playing anymore, but now it's okay. So I'm not really sure what they're doing with Yandy. Like, it's very confusing.
I've got extreme opinions on that, and if you don't already know what they are, you can tweet me and ask me what they are, because I'm not going to go into it right now. on players needing to play every day, I think that's complete bullshit.
But should he be sitting?
No, he's not going to be sitting every day. I mean, he was sitting today. They got Daniel Robertson back in the lineup, and Robertson had a single, so of course they're going to use that as confirmation bias of
being able to play against left-handers. Yeah,
of him being the greatest thing to come up. But I think Diaz will still get some regular time, and that's why I really think Gonzalez is going to be gone in short order. Robertson can play second base. He can play all 3 outfield positions. Diaz can play third base, and he can play right and left.
I don't know if he didn't prove he could play the outfield. I mean, I think he's better than what he showed in Toronto, but I mean, I don't know how
the Indians believe the Indians believe saying something, it makes it true.
Right.
So he can play right and left, and so should I list it? With Ramirez, who can play shortstop if he needs to. I think they're going to use Gonzalez to give Lindor a day off, and then send Gonzalez down, and then Lindor doesn't need their day off for another month or 2. They might bring Lindor up they might bring Gonzalez up every 3 months to give Lindor a day off.
I would rather see Gonzalez stay than Diaz at this point, actually. And I think Robertson's only here until, I don't know. Couldn't you see Jackson spelling the end for Robertson?
I could see Robertson being on this team for the entire season in a Michael Martinez role, because he can play right, center, and left, and because he can play second base. I could see him spending the entire season on the team as a pinch runner, defensive guy.
I just assumed he'd be gone as soon as Geyer came back, but you could be right. I didn't think about that.
Because I don't think he won't have options.
He doesn't. I don't think they'll care if he doesn't play, even though they don't care. I mean, Yandy plays right now either. I'm not. Yeah. Again, I'm not sure on their reasoning on a lot of things right now, because they've gone in both directions since the season started on a lot of this stuff.
And again, I think the Indians have. They're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing, and they have deep reasoning for everything, but their reasoning is not what they tell the public. They're very private about stuff. They're very private about injuries. Nobody knew about this Brandon Geyer thing until he went on the DL. You know, we saw Almonte hurt his shoulder live on TV. He hurt his shoulder, and he was back in the lineup 2 days later. We saw Brantley get hurt, and he was back in the lineup 3 days later. So they keep these things when they can keep them under the table. They keep them under the table, and you don't hear about them until it happens. So them saying whatever they say about Yandy Diaz is not necessarily what they believe internally, and they'll say what they have to
in their actions with him.
Yeah, and so he's on the bench obviously right now. And my guess is because they think he's going to be helpful against left-handed pitching. You know, I think that's what, in the long run, that's what that is. They think he's going to be helpful against lefties. They want to keep him on the roster in the major leagues because they want the major league team to win now, and they think he's a better option than Almonte or Martinez or Naquin or whatever.
Well, that's probably true.
But apparently not above Chisenhall, because Chisenhall played today.
That was because lefties had a lot better numbers this year off of Santiago than right-handers for whatever reason. He had reverse splits, and it just worked out that way. That's why I'm not sure.
You go ahead.
That's why I'm not sure the lineup stays the same, just because they knew Santiago had reverse splits all year so far.
Well, and I think it will, and I do think that lineup construction is an extremely overrated topic to talk about. It's such an easy thing to argue about, who should bat where and whatever, and people talk about it all the time. But in the end, it really doesn't matter, because even if a guy does something more often than he does something else, he hits singles more often than he hits doubles, or he walks more often than he strikes out, or something. Like, you pick one stat over something else, it doesn't matter. He still does. Everybody does everything a certain amount of times. Everybody gets out the majority of the time they're up to bat. So you can't set up a perfect inning. And I think we talked about this on Dorf a week ago. You don't say your fourth hitter isn't there because you think your first three guys are going to reach base without a run scoring, and your fourth guy's going to hit a grand slam. It's not a realistic expectation. It's silly. So you hit your best hitter third generally, because he's going to be up with somebody on base, not necessarily two guys on base, but one person on base. Chances are one of those two guys
or the nine guy eventually.
Yeah, and then your third guy is going to be up with somebody on base. That's the idea, not that he's going to have everybody on base every time. And your fourth guy maybe will have one of those three guys on base. You're not planning on a home run every at bat. You have to really work on this thing as within the probabilities of baseball. So it doesn't matter. Santana walks a lot. Yes, he also hits a lot of home runs. But he still, when a lot of home runs is 30 in a 162 game season, that's 132 games he doesn't hit a home run in. If he walks 100 times, there's still 400 at bats he's not walking in. 400 plus at bats. So it's not like you can say he does this thing every time he comes up to bat. So if he's batting first or second or third or fourth or fifth, Santana, it doesn't matter. He's going to help the team more than he hurts the team offensively. Kipnis is going to help the team more than he hurts the team offensively. Whether he's batting first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth, it doesn't matter. And so when they change the lineup and then they win, everyone's all like, yay. But the fact is they changed the lineup, and the 3 and the 4 hitters got on base once the entire game by a walk. Encarnacion walked once.
They switched one thing. It wasn't like they made major changes. Santana went 5 and Kipnis went 1.
But Robertson played, and Robertson got the first RBI single. So I think that they throw that in.
What's the difference? That's where Gaia would.
Yeah, exactly. So my point is, you change the lineup, and the 3 and the 4 hitters, who are your 2 biggest hitters, don't do anything, and they still score 8 runs. The lineup has nothing to do with it. It's the pitcher that they're facing, the hitters who are up to bat. Yeah, you don't want to hit your best hitter 7th, 8th, or 9th, but when your top 6 hitters are hitting 1 through 6, it really doesn't matter what order they're hitting in as far as runs scored go.
I agree with you that lineup construction's really overrated. I think the only part of it that's worth discussing or debating or having anything about is skill sets. Like last year, Francona argued that having Ramirez hit 5th behind Napoli and now this year behind Encarnacion is the ability to put the ball in play and not strike out. So when you have guys on, you're able to – there's a hole open between first and second usually with the guy holding them on, and you're able to maybe start the runners because certain guys are more likely to make contact like Ramirez or Lindor. I think.
Yeah, but you're still trying to predict when in the lineup guys are going to be on base. You really don't know.
I think you just bank on skill sets. You put guys with certain skill sets in certain positions where you might be likely to benefit from what they do there, which is why like Ramirez hitting 5th or whatever. That's those kind of things I think make some sense in terms of construction. But that's it. I mean, there's very few.
But I mean,
very few
if
points
Ramirez
to
was
make
hitting
that.
third, if Ramirez was hitting third, you could not complain about that lineup.
No, I mean, you can again.
I mean, he's arguably the best hitter on the team.
There are a bunch of variations in this lineup that would probably work just as well as what happened today. Again, it just depends on, like you said, what guys wind up doing on that individual day. But I mean, I get the point of where certain skill sets play off of each other better.
The only one I'll give you is that, like, Lindor today bunted for a single because he had a big 0-4 and he decided he needed a bunt to get a hit, which I completely go with. I'm all for bunting for hits, and he bunted for a single and stole second. This is something I've seen Gabriel Mejia do a million times, exaggeratingly. 5 times, probably. But, so if you have a guy like Greg Allen or Gabriel Mejia in the future, who maybe is going to be like a 240 hitter, but can steal bases really easily, and you can hit that guy ninth. Like I think there could be a definite advantage to hitting a guy ninth who has great speed and can steal bases whenever he wants to. Or if you have that same guy who can steal bases and get on base all the time, hitting him first, like Ricky Henderson back in the day, or Kenny Lofton even, getting on base a lot and stealing second. I think there's a great advantage for that at the top of the lineup. Beyond that, you hit your top 6 guys in the top 6, and you're pretty good. If you only have 4 good guys, hit them in the top 4.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and you can argue, like you said, putting Kipnis 5th and Ramirez 6th to break up the lefties, that makes some sense too. So you don't have late game matchup issues. That makes a little bit of sense. But I mean, overall lineup construction is just stupid and a lot of random variance, as Trevor Bauer would say.
All right, so that's done. I think.
Yeah.
It's not that, and I mean, people love to give credit to whatever it makes sense. And you want to call Francona a genius, whatever. Call him a genius. It's fine. It's not going to hurt me. Our main topic tonight, again, stealing from John Oliver. I just finished a wonderful book called A Well-Paid Slave. Have you ever read this book?
I have not.
You know what it's about?
I'm assuming somebody in the minor leagues who.
No.
No? Okay.
No. Have you heard the quote?
I can't say that I have, no.
The quote is, "A well-paid slave is still a slave." Do you agree?
I think I've heard that quote. Yes.
Okay, so Curt Flood is the originator of that quote, and the book is about Curt Flood, who was a major leaguer for the Cardinals. He was a 6-time Gold Glove winner. He was a 7-time, was a 7-time Gold Glove winner, 6-time MVP vote getter. Made 3 All-Star games, won 2 World Series. Really was apparently an incredible defensive singles hitter. Like, he was a great defensive center fielder who hit a lot of singles for the Cardinals in the 1960s. And he sued baseball in 1970 for the right to be a free agent. And it was because of him that we have free agency today. He lost his case. And this month's Burning River Book Club is going to be about this book. But he lost his case. And the most interesting part I found about this was in the whole case was essentially, is baseball is a monopoly or baseball is not a monopoly. Baseball is not a monopoly. One. That's the argument that won the Supreme Court case, is that baseball is not a monopoly. And then the union argued for the rights to free agency, and they eventually got them. And the 10-5 rule, the no trade clause, that is because Curt Flood was on the Cardinals for 10 years. He was a 10-year veteran with 5 years with the Cardinals, and the reason they made that rule years later was essentially because of him. He was traded to. Where was he traded to? Baltimore? Either way, he was traded. He was traded to Philadelphia. That's who it was. He was traded to Philadelphia, and he didn't want to go to Philadelphia. He was with St. Louis. And he said no, and that was the cause of the lawsuit. So eventually that 10-5 rule that still exists today, the no trade clause, that's because of Curt Flood.
And yet he's not in the Hall of Fame somehow.
Well, and there was an argument. You know Marvin Miller, right?
Yes, the former.
So everything that Marvin Miller is famous for is what Curt Flood did.
Right, and he got all the credit for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, Marvin Miller was in charge of the union at the time. Curt Flood was the player who went there, and it's funny. A lot of the guys in the book that fought with Curt Flood are guys we know now. Howard Cosell fought for him. Joe Torre, when he was a player, fought for him. There were a lot of guys fighting for Curt Flood. Bob Gibson, pitcher. There were a lot of guys fighting on his side that are in the book that are really interesting. That we still remember, but we don't remember him. And he probably should be in the Hall of Fame just for bringing free agency on, essentially. But he ended up getting blackballed.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my point to this is I would like to have a discussion on this. I actually agreed with the guy on the Supreme Court whose name was Harry Blackmun, who said that baseball was not a monopoly because it wasn't a monopoly to the consumers. Like the consumers, the people who buy baseball, the fans, they can go other places and buy sports entertainment with their money. They don't have to go to baseball games. They can go to football games or basketball games or hockey games or movies or, sit at home and watch TV. They don't have to go. But for the baseball players themselves, it is a monopoly. Or was at the time. It isn't anymore. But it was at the time. They couldn't play anywhere else. If they played in Mexico and they tried to come back, they would blackball them and they wouldn't let them come back. Now you can go play in Korea and come back and be an all-star. We think, maybe. We'll see what Thames does. But so that was the interesting part to me.
I guess I agree with you. I mean, yeah, in the sense of a consumer standpoint, it's not a monopoly, but it's also kind of a private sector in a way, I guess. I mean, you can't really call a monopoly in terms of ownership and even for the players because, yeah, I mean, players still get blackballed in some ways for certain things. I mean, nobody signed Barry Bonds at the end of his career, and you could even consider.
Well, but if that actually happened, let's say Barry Bonds was officially blackballed and Major League Baseball said they couldn't sign him, that would have been illegal. So that didn't actually happen.
Okay, what about what? Okay, then
it used to happen back in the day where they would blackball a guy and they wouldn't let him back in.
Right, and that's where collusion came in. That's where.
Yeah, and that's not talking about guys who are banned. Being banned is different. Like Shoeless Joe was banned. Yeah. That's different. I'm talking about guys who were not banned. They didn't do anything wrong legally, but they did something that the owners didn't like and then wouldn't let them back in. Or they said something the owners didn't like and they wouldn't let them back in.
I mean, I think that's happened over the years. You can't prove it in a lot of cases with certain players.
I mean, Bonds was great until his last season, so I do think that there was definitely some pressure not to sign him. But Ramirez kept getting signed. He got signed by the Athletics, and then he got signed by the Cubs as a coach. He kept coming back even after he was retired. So it's hard to say that there was, collusion on that level just because a guy did steroids.
Overall, it's hard to argue it'd be a monopoly. Yeah. Now that there's free agency, before you could. I mean, that was more of
that was kind of the point of the book. All right, so I guess part of this I wanted to talk about the reserve clause back in the day. The reserve clause was you signed a contract. It was a 1-year contract, and at the end of the contract, it says the ownership reserves the right to sign you for 1 more year at the same salary if they want to. and every player had to sign this contract. And every player did. They signed the contract, they got paid, and then the next year, the ownership of the team decided whether they wanted to keep them or not. The players were never allowed to leave the team. And a lot of times, players like Bob Feller gets a lot of credit for being loyal. Bob Feller wasn't loyal. He had to play for the Indians. He didn't have an option. There was no choice. There was never any point in time where he could have left. He had to play for the Indians for his entire career because they kept re-signing him to this reserve clause contract. And the way the reserve
during that time still
there was not. That's I'll get to that. So essentially, because Curt Flood lost his case against the Supreme Court, he did not. He didn't win anything. He didn't get rid of the reserve clause in 1970 or 1971. After that, Marvin Miller said, well, the reserve clause says if you sign this contract, then the ownership gets one more year under the same salary, so don't sign the contract. So there were a bunch of players who would play and they wouldn't sign a contract, and the team had to pay them at the previous year's salary, but they didn't actually sign the next year's contract. So the year after that, they became a free agent. And they kind of found a loophole. They found this loophole in the reserve clause, and they were able to become a free agent through that. And then eventually they collective bargained free agency. And while they were doing that, one of the things they collective bargained was arbitration in front of a unbiased party. So that's when they started the arbitration after 3 years, where you got to, for 3 years, the first 3 years you're under the team because even the players admitted that the team put a lot of resources into these guys early on, and they deserved to have them for a few years before they became free agents. So after 3 years of being under team control, you get 3 years of arbitration, and then you become a free agent. So that all came from this Curt Flood stuff back in 1970, 1971. 1976 was the first year of free agency. That's like it's a hum. Yeah, so essentially that's and like I said, that's the 10-5 rule and all that stuff came about was in the 1970s. They did strike in 1971, I think. They also had a strike in 1981. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it very quickly went from players making, like the highest paid players were making $150,000 a year to the highest paid players making multiple millions per year. It very quickly went from the 60s to the 80s. That increase in average salary, maximum salary, all that.
So, what's your argument?
All right. So now, one of your things that you've always hit on is the minor league salaries and how they don't get paid enough. And I'll let you make that one if you'd like. I think it's unfair that they aren't covered by the Major League Union, personally, because every single major leaguer in baseball today used to be a minor leaguer. The last major leaguer that I remember to not be a minor leaguer was Ken Griffey Jr., who went straight from being drafted to be going in the majors. So pretty much, maybe Jose Abreu or somebody who was an international signing. But in general, every single major leaguer used to be a minor leaguer. So I think it's bullshit that they don't cover those guys. They have no respect at all for those minor leaguer guys. But I'd like to hear your argument on the minor league side of it, if you have it real quick.
For not getting paid enough?
Yeah, that they are not getting paid or they're not being treated as human beings. That's the whole thing.
I mean, it goes all the way up to the players' union because essentially it starts with the players' union not recognizing minor leaguers as part of their union. There is no minor league union. They're on their own. They have no right to argue for anything, and they're kind of stuck where they are as far as money, and it's dictated by level. So first you have the Major League Union pretty much throwing them under the bus, and then they make a big deal out of cases like Chris Bryant 2 years ago getting left in the minors for a week, and they were probably a grievance against that. Yet the rest of the minor leaguers aren't worth the union apparently. So they want to pick and choose which minor leaguers they want to give rights to, which I think is bullshit. So the players union has a lot to do with this, just as much as the owners do. Well, the reason I'm sure you saw it today was that Deadspin had a report that the Columbia Fireflies, which is the Mets low A team in the South Atlantic League, has made $3 million, they estimate, off of Tim Tebow this year. And I can tell you, low A players, so and the average player, and this is not including possibly signing bonuses or anything, the average player on a South Atlantic League roster probably makes anywhere between 10 to 25,000 for the season.
Well, I saw a spreadsheet that had the numbers a while ago, and I can't remember what they are now, but I remember them lining up fairly well with military salaries. Like if you were in the low rookie levels, you made like a private salary, which is not very much. And if you were the next level up, you made like a corporal salary, and the next level up, you made like a sergeant salary, and then finally, double A, you're making like a lieutenant salary, and then once you're in triple A, if you're on the 40 man, you're guaranteed, I think, 250,000 a year, and then if you're on the 25 man, you're guaranteed 500,000 a year, no matter what. So once you're up to the AAA level, you're pretty much rich.
Yeah,
but
you're
until
in an upper tax bracket, yeah.
Yeah, until you hit AAA, you're really not making much money at all.
You're barely making a livable salary until AA.
Unless you're a high draft pick.
Right, and
if
that's
you're a high draft pick,
you
got a few $1 million to play with before you got to worry about. I mean, honestly, you make a couple $1 million on a bonus, you're not worried about what you're making a year playing for the AZL Indians.
The rest of your life, yeah. But here's the problem with that is that, remember, players only get paid for the season. So April through the first week of September is covered, and anything after that essentially doesn't have to be covered by any team at all.
I wonder about that because I see guys here, and I watch extended spring training is going on right now, and I'm seeing a lot of guys here like names people might know, like Will Benson and Daniel Robertson, and names people don't know, like Alcides Herrera and Henry Pujols and
right.
Jason Rodriguez. Like a lot of guys that people don't know are down here. They have to be getting paid something. I don't know what they're getting paid. I have no clue on that. I'd love to know. They play at 10:30 in the morning because by 1 it's 110 degrees. So
yeah.
they start the games at 10:30 in the morning, and it's just roasting. And I sitting out there the other day watching them was miserable. and I was just thinking, like, dude, I only watch about 1 to 2 games a week in the extended spring. I'll go to every AZL game because they play at night, which is smart. It's colder. it's still 100 degrees, but at least the sun is down. But these morning games, I can't take it, so I only go to about 1 or 2 a week, and it's so hot, and those guys look like they're dying out there, and I'm like, I hope they're getting paid. Like they have to be getting paid something to be here, right?
I mean, they're getting paid, but not great.
Yeah, and they'll probably be paying rookie league salary. All the players at the end of the season are going to go to Mahoning Valley, AZL, or DSL. A few of them. Hopefully, Jan Rodriguez goes to DSL because I don't want to see him anymore. But everybody else, hopefully, they go to AZL or Mahoning Valley. There was one exception. I thought Soto, Junior Soto, I think should go to Lake County, but the majority of them are rookie ball guys.
And by being down there, essentially, my understanding is that the team takes care of their housing down in Arizona. In some cases, outside of that, though, in the minor leagues, like Lake County, I know where most of the players live in Lake County. They don't have a whole lot of host families anymore. That's how a lot of minor leaguers survived early on. I know in Mahoning Valley they have a pretty good host family base. Some and other cities do as well, like Francisco Lindor, and he had the money, but he didn't live in the apartments. I remember he lived with the host family for a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and they have host families in Goodyear too. I've met some people who said they, housed a minor leaguer, whether it was from the Reds or the Indians or whatever.
And remember, those families aren't getting money from the team. They're getting free tickets, which I guess constitutes some money. But again, this is another way the team isn't taking care of their housing while they're extrapolated to other cities. I mean, and players can be sent to levels at any time. I mean, there are guys in the organization that the organization doesn't necessarily value their development. They value what they can do on a roster. So you see guys like, you'll see certain relievers go from Lake County to Columbus. See, that's a huge jump. And it's just because they need an arm and they don't really care what happens to that reliever. They just need someone there to eat up innings because a lot of guys are taxed or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of somebody who we just did the minor league rankings, and I'm thinking Matt Whitehouse might have been one of those guys early in his career.
David Spear went from last year from Lynchburg to Akron and Columbus all in the same year, and he's back in Akron this year. So clearly he wasn't ready for Columbus. They just needed an arm. And in those cases, they take care of the players with hotels. But wherever they're at, unless they have wherever they're at for most of the season, guys get an apartment or a lease. The teams don't foot any of the bill for that stuff, and they can be moved any second for whatever reason. And the teams get away without doing that, and they do it with host families, and some of them have partnerships with certain apartment complexes. I know, like I said, I know where they live in Lake County because the guys live in the same apartment every year. But most years, those guys have like 5 players to a 3 or 2 bedroom apartment because it just keeps the rent that cheap because they're not making any money. And there are some teams that don't do well with nutrition. The Indians are pretty good about it. I know that. As far as feeding their players at home, the post-game spread is good. The breakfast
they feed them at the Goodyear Development Complex. They feed them pretty well, from what I've heard.
And the minor leagues, they obviously get a per diem on the road. I don't know what their per diem on the road is. I want to say it's like $20. I could be wrong, but it's in that range. But when you're on a 7-game road trip, you're getting $20 a day. And if the opposing team doesn't feed you, they don't take care of your meals. What are you eating for $20 a day? You're eating Chipotle. You're eating pizza.
Yeah, I could do that.
yeah. But I mean, when you're also not trying to compete at the highest level and make it to the major league.
Of course I am.
Yeah.
You don't see me hustling?
That's my whole point. The whole system's messed up. I mean, you can't pay. I know these guys at the end of the season don't get paid. I don't know what happens when they go to like Instructs. I know in the Arizona Fall League they get paid and there's housing for them there. I don't know how it works in Instructs. You probably know better than I do. And on top of that, I know if minor leaguers want to get to spring training early, or they want to spend past Instructs there, a lot of them pay for that on their own dime as well. They're paying to stay in Arizona and work.
Yeah.
To work on their craft. So again, there's a lot of free labor going on for these guys to improve their talent and get to the major leagues and get paid. But until they get to that point, and if they do, there's a lot of free labor there. Trust me, there's a lot of.
I'm going to say that our arguments probably fall on the same political spectrum that we fall on, whereas your argument is from they deserve more because they're doing this. My argument is they are worth more to the team, so they should be paid more.
They are.
The team, but your argument is like they feel sorry for the minor league guys because they're not getting taken care of the way they should be. But to me, it's the team should feel like they should need to take care of them because they are worth something, or they're not. If they are not worth it, I look how many minor leaguers they have. They have. I think we've done the math before. You know what? Have you got 25 times 5? 125 minor leaguers or something like that. More than that, essentially, and you're talking about 10, 15 of them mattering, to the major league team eventually. If you don't think that they matter, enough to pay for their food and their lodging and their, in a reasonable subsistence of life, then you don't need to have that many minor league teams. Cut 30 of them and pay the rest of them something that they can live off of. That's what
If they're not going to make it. If you don't think they're good enough to support because you don't think they're going to make it anywhere, then forget it.
Yeah, that's my personal opinion. Is don't pay 125 guys the money that you could give to 100 guys and actually make the 100 guys comfortable. Like, don't stretch it to 125 because maybe one of those last 25 guys is going to make it at some point. Just get rid of. They don't need the scrappers. There are teams that don't have that team. Just get rid of the scrappers, or get rid of the AZL Indians, or get rid of the DSL Indians. You don't need that many minor league teams. Have one less minor league team and pay the rest of them a reasonable wage. That you can get rid of some of this junk. They've got guys in every level that are never going to be anything.
They're just roster spots right now.
Yeah, and you could pick them out in a minute, and they are there because they needed bats or innings pitched out of that position. But you can pick them out easily. It's not hard. I didn't want to do it to rip anybody.
Right.
But you know who these guys are at every level, and they don't need them. It's excessive from top to bottom. So, to me, I think every major league team should drop a minor league team straight across, and maybe the players' union would be against it. And I'm sure a lot of people, Keith Law would probably be up in arms. How could you cut that many people at once? But I think if you did that, you'd probably have a much more fair system if the money's not there. Because obviously, I go to all these AZL games and all the extended spring games and the instructional league games. They're not taking in a gate for that. They don't make a cent from that. All those players getting paid. If they're getting paid or whatever, they're getting food, they're getting trained. The trainers are getting paid. The coaches are getting paid. Grant Fink is getting paid. He's here. He's getting paid. Those guys are all getting paid. But there's not a single person buying a ticket. There's not a single person buying a hot dog. They don't do that at Goodyear. They just play baseball games. But they're getting paid to play those games. So I think there's an issue there. I think they are not making as much money at this level as some people think they are. Like you just said, they made a bunch of money off Tim Tebow. The Mets did. That's an aberration. Most of the teams are not making that much money at the level.
It is, and a lot of minor league teams do not make money for the season. Honestly, a lot of minor league owners. Team owners, and you got to remember, a lot of people don't realize that minor league owners don't pay players' salary. It all comes from the major league team. That you believe it or not, that's actually a common misconception. Most minor league owners end the year in the red. They don't make a ton. If they make any money, it's very minuscule. There's not a lot of serious profit involved. It's very rare.
That goes back to my point that if the major league teams value the minor league system, they should pay the minor leaguers it shouldn't. They do pay the minor leaguers out of their funds, but they should pay for the whole thing based on the fact that these guys could be future major leaguers.
Right, it's worth something to them to invest in who they draft. I've got a cousin that writes for Baseball Prospectus and has covered this topic a couple times, and you look at the Cardinals. I know they're one of the best teams about nutrition in the minor leagues, and a lot of teams are getting better about it. But it's not just money. It's money, but it's just how you invest in them in general. It's food and money, and living quarters, getting guys good places to sleep, because we see how important recovery and rest and sleep are now, and good nutrition. You don't want minor leaguers like Yoan Moncada eating 50 Twinkies a week. And you don't want guys like Andrew Miller sleeping on blow-up mattresses in a roommate's closet, because that's not going to help them become good major leaguers one day. And even if you look at, let's say Daniel Robertson, a name I'm throwing out there because I read today he was a 31st round pick or whatever. you draft guys in the first or second
Well,
round.
according
Those
to
guys you need to make the majors because you've drafted them highly. They're big time prospects. They're big names. But think of how valuable it is to have a guy like, anybody. If you take any 30th round pick, let's say he turns into a guy who over 6 years or 7 years with the club gives you 5 or 6 total a WAR, or even 10, it's so valuable to have anybody like that who's drafted after the 10th round or 15th round to give you value over several years. And if you're not investing in him like you would a first round pick, you might lose out on the value that player brings, and you're hurting your organization, you're hurting a draft. You're not giving your draft picks a chance to succeed, and you need guys below the first round to contribute. That's how teams like the Indians survive, is having good drafts. And to be quite honest, their drafts have kind of sucked in the last couple of years. But you need guys in the 31st round to make it, and investing in them like a first round pick, making sure they have enough money to sleep somewhere good and good food.
Well, I think that's the difference. Yep. The difference between bonus money and then the money after that. And you count the Indians, but it's every team does this the same way. It's not like there's other teams that are really taking care of their minor leaguers.
There are some organizations better than the other. Yeah, Indians are actually, for the most part, pretty good about it. I know the Cardinals are really good about it, and there's other teams that are good too. But they're, like you said, yeah, it's across the board. Teams are just losing out on potentially a lot of value from players just because they don't invest proper resources into their players, like money and nutrition and good places to sleep because of good money, that kind of thing.
And the lawsuit in California last year, of course, that didn't affect the Indians because the Indians don't have a Californian minor league team. But there was a lawsuit where minor league baseball sued minor league baseball or Major League Baseball because the minor leaguers weren't being paid minimum wage. And California has some really liberal labor laws, which allows that lawsuit to take place. But the people who sued were all former minor leaguers. There was no one active because the active players are still afraid. And that brings it back to the Curt Flood story. Curt Flood was a superstar, but he was traded. He was at the end of his career, and he was traded from a World Series team to Philadelphia, who I'll just say were not very good at the time. And he did not want to. He had a side business in St. Louis, and he wanted to stay in. His family was in St. Louis, and he wanted to stay in St. Louis, and they traded him, and he didn't have any choice in it. And he had been with the team for 12 years, and he said, "No, I'm going to retire. I'm not going to do it." And then he sued them afterwards. That's kind of what those minor leaguers were doing in California. They were gone. They were out of the system. Those were the ones that could sue them. You can't be in the system. You can't be Will Benson and sue the minor league system. You can't be Luke Wakamatsu and sue for more money. You have to be somebody who's out of the system because they're just going to blackball you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard. And I think the only way I see any change at all is if the Major League Players Union starts doing something for the minor leaguers. And it wouldn't take much. It really wouldn't take much effort at all. I don't think. Especially percentage-wise, the millions and billions of dollars that Major League players bring in compared to the tiny amount that minor leaguers make. And I tried to I was going to make a point last year in an article about how the Indians were spending a ton of money on the minor leaguers, and I added up all the minor league salaries, all the draft bonuses and everything, and it came to like such a paltry number. I had to completely change the subject of the article to be like, wow, they're really not paying much money at all for these minor leaguers. Because it was embarrassing. It was less than a utility infielder for the entire minor league system.
Right, Michael Martinez makes more than Martinez like more than a whole low A team.
Yeah, it was like $5 or $6 million, but it was, if you're gonna sign a guy like Mike Aviles or whatever years ago, or Ryan Rayburn or whatever. Those guys were making like $5-6 million. And that's pretty much the entire Indians minor league system. It's not, I mean, and that's including draft money. That's including the big signing guys.
Which is why I tweeted today that $3 million that Tim Tebow might have made Columbia would pay for essentially 2.5, 3 minor league teams for the year right now.
Yeah, so I think
we're only in May. It's May 14th. It's not even the whole year. It's May 14th.
The players' union has a lot of clout. It's the strongest union in all of sports. They should get behind these people. I don't understand how you can forget what you were a week after. It's like you get called up to the major leagues and you're like, oh, I'm a major leaguer now. I was never anything else. I was always a major leaguer. Starting today, I was never anything else. Those last 5 years of training in the minors didn't happen. I'm just a major leaguer. Fuck all those guys. I'm better than them. I don't get it at all. You got to remember where you came from. You got to think about those guys.
It's an owner versus player thing, you know.
But no, it's player versus player because they don't have any power. Nobody under the major league level has any power. Maybe a couple guys do. You know, the big money guys. Tristan McKenzie's got a little power, but he can't do anything really because they would still cut him if he decided to become a martyr for the minor league system. They would let him go. Yeah, they wouldn't deal with that.
And nobody would sign him. Nobody would sign him.
Yeah, so I mean, before you hit the majors, you've got no power. Once you have the majors, you have power, especially as a unit, as a players' union unit. And all the baseball writers in the world can talk about it as much as they want to. Nobody's going to do anything until the actual major league players do something about it.
And it's a broken system because of that. Minor league players need a voice. They don't have a voice.
Yeah, and they can't have one because, like I just said, that's my take on that. It's your take on that. You don't really want to talk about this retired number thing today, do you?
Not anymore. Not since we got into that discussion. I'll just say this: Derek Jeter's worthy of having his number retired, but the Yankees retire so many damn numbers. It's ridiculous.
I think the Astros retire even more. If I remember right, the Astros retired like 5 or 6 numbers, and it's ridiculous for how long that franchise has been around.
And like the Mariners have 2. They have Griffey, and they're going to retire Edgar Martinez. And the Indians are going to retire Jim Thomes after he makes the Hall of Fame. The Indians only retire numbers after a guy has made the Major League Hall of Fame. They don't even have a lot of guys in their.
You know, I'll say
they're Hall of Fame and retired.
I really like the Indians' retired number list. The one thing I disagree with is I love what the Tigers did. They retired Ty Cobb. He didn't wear a number. He played before numbers. They just have it written on their retired number wall, Ty Cobb. Write Stan Kovaleski, Tris Speaker, and Addie Joss on that fucking wall, and I'll be happy. Just give these guys some credit. Addie Joss played until he died for the Indians. Ray Chapman did too, but he wasn't as good.
Wow.
Tris Speaker.
Wow.
Tris Speaker and Stan Kovaleski won the Indians their first World Series. Give those 3 guys, Joss, Kovaleski, and Speaker, some credit. Put them up on that wall next to Doby and Feller and Harder and all those, put them up there next to those guys, and I'll be happy. There wasn't a single player who played for the Indians from 1958 to 1994 who deserves to be retired.
And, well, they do have some kind of monument to them. They do have those walls in the upper deck have Kovaleski and Speaker and Addie Joss and Cy Young.
Yeah, just write them with the retired numbers. And Kovaleski wore a number for a couple of years, I think, or Speaker did. The first numbers were like in 1924, so a couple of those guys did have a number. They only wore it for a year, so just write their names on the wall. You don't have to retire any numbers for them. Just write their name on the wall, and I'll be happy.
All right.
They deserve some credit.
I agree with you, and the last thing I'll say is Jim Thome deserves his statue. He didn't deserve it before Boudreaux, but he deserves his own statue, and he got it. Just wanted to fit that in there.
Nobody deserved it before Joss. Nobody died for the team like Joss. There's nothing better than dying for your team, right? He got tuberculosis. Or was it meningitis? I don't remember. Tubercular meningitis. One of those things. Died in 1911. Tragedy.
Wow. Bummer.
I'm still sad about it. He'd be alive to this day. He would have thrown 20 shutouts for the Indians last year if it weren't for the removal of the reserve clause and the fact that he's been dead for 100 years.
What a
That was
guy.
a really
What a
good joke.
teammate.
That
What
was
a
a really
teammate.
good joke, and I blew it. He would have thrown 20 shutouts for the Indians last year if it weren't for the removal of the reserve clause and the fact that he's been dead for 116 years.
Minor details.
There's 106 years. I fucked it up again.
I think that's how we should end. I think
That's good enough for tonight. We'll be with you next time, or Danny Cunningham. Danny the Cunningham. Ben Buckets Belden. I'm going to fuck up everybody's name tonight. And Jared the Goofball Goodball. What's his last name?
I have no clue. We'll talk about basketball at some point, though.
How do you I know these guys? You got to know these guys. Burning River Basketball. Follow them on Twitter at Burning River Basketball. Follow me on Twitter at Burning River BB. Follow Justin on Twitter at JL_baseball because he's the JL Baseball. Junior League Baseball.
Only one and only.
Whole lotta.
I used to have a blog named
Do you
Whole
like
Lotta Sports.
called Whole Lotta?
Never been called it before.
Oh, you haven't? You like Led Zeppelin at all?
What?
Oh man, I need a drink. Led Zeppelin.
I think you need less drinks.
No, I need some water. Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin?
Whole Lotta Love.
Yes, I know the song.
All right, that's it for tonight.
Mercifully.
Check out our sober writing on bringerofbaseball.com.